To introduce the next guest is a bit disingenuous because she is known before anybody ever needs to introduce her. Her columns reach you, her books reach you, her opinions on social media reach you. In many ways, I think it's safe to say Shobha Day has as many avatars as she has children. She's been a model. She's been an editor, founder and editor of a host of successful magazines. She has been one of the country's most successful columnists. She has been a best-selling, by far, I think the best-selling female author in India, possibly one of the best-selling authors.
Stop.
I will not. It's too late for you to be shy.
Not shy, just...
Okay, so we will get to this, but I think what is most formidable about Shobha is that she takes the position of being public seriously enough to say the things that nobody else will. I don't know another woman in Indian public life who says, go on, call me a cow, they're treated better than women in this country anyway. Ladies and gentlemen, Shobha Day. Shobha. Okay, most people lie about their age to say they're younger. Every time you reveal your age, people gasp because they cannot believe it. It's the other way around. You are 71 years old.
Yes.
Last year, Shobha wrote a book. When she turned 70, she wrote a book called 70 and To Hell With It. I'd say no matter what your age, say to hell with it. Shobha, what makes you get out of bed in the morning at 71? Raring to go as much as you always have?
The same thing that made me get out of bed when I was 17. I don't think age is a factor that should change any of it. You get up with a sense of enthusiasm, a sense of curiosity, a sense of, let's get on with life.
So my question really was, what are those sources of enthusiasm that drive you to get out there and do what you do? And that's a lot of things.
Well, I don't think there's anything at all in the world that can be termed boring. It's how you look at it. And I get up with a strong sense of anticipation for each and every day because I don't know what that day is going to hold, how it's going to unfold, and what I might discover about the world and about myself, about my family, about some new experience, about food, about writing, about thinking. I mean, we all are gifted with an imagination. So that imagination is what keeps us driven and going. At least that's what it does in my case. All of it has to do with curiosity of a child and just looking forward to every moment. And as you rightly said, at 71, every day is a bonus. Every year is a triple bonus. And you want to make the most of it. I do.
You make all of us want to race to 71. I think one of the interesting things, and you alluded to it, is that you wake up with a sense of curiosity. A lot of what has happened in your life that people would imagine is by design is in fact the product of an attitude that you call why not. So why not is the reason you seem to have done a lot of things. You said you became a model because somebody offered you a contract and you said, why not? You said the same for being an editor, the same for being a columnist and an author. Yes. Would you explain how that works? When you are encountered with something that you don't know, is there never fear? Is there always challenge? Is that a type A personality at work?
I'm not sure about the A+ personality. I don't see myself really like that. But certainly, I enjoy risk, and I enjoy taking those chances. I like the idea of opportunities. When they come your way, you're obliged to grab them about what's life all about without that. So the why not can be very simply explained as being an adventurous person and certainly not afraid. I don't understand that particular four-letter word. The others I do, but not that one. So it is about taking chances, and I enjoy that a lot. I did enjoy it at 10, maybe even earlier, and I continue to enjoy that. It drives me.
I don't know whether, again, it's by design or accident, but relationships form a large part of the canvas of your writing and of your observation. In fact, I think Shobha famously said, other people watch birds, I watch marriages.
Yes. I
Now-
find
so,
that...
sorry,
yeah,
and
sorry,
I
you
think
wanted to
there's
complete
almost no
something.
question. There's almost no question there because really, but the question, if I were going to ask it, is what fascinates you about marriage? Also, in the years you've been observing it as participant, as somebody married twice, and as observer of thousands of marriages, what has changed? What has evolved? What needs to change? What doesn't need to change?
I'm a huge marriage champion. I believe in it. I am committed to it. I value it. I think it's what gives me enormous support, strength, inspiration. We fight a lot, primarily over politics, but that's also something that keeps, I'm speaking very personally, that keeps the marriage zinging along. It would be very boring to be married to a doormat and walk all over that person and have no challenge at all, and someone who keeps telling you you're wonderful or you're not so wonderful. I think marriage has to be about all relationships. I don't particularly categorize just marriage. Any relationship worth anything has to be about equality, whether it's with your children or with your staff, your colleagues, whosoever you interact with. If you interact as equals, there's just that much more respect. And for me, I am a huge, huge proponent of marriage, and I'll continue to be that because I don't think we've come up with a better alternative. I don't see something working fantastically across the world that is an option that I would even consider halfway attractive. But I keep coming back to this introduction of yours and many other people also. I mean, you know, Rajat Gupta is younger than I am. He's actually 11 months younger than I am. We're both 1948 born. How come you didn't ask him? How does it feel to be 71? And what would you do differently?
Largely because I haven't had a chance to talk to him yet.
Correct, okay. So, okay, I'll ask you that.
Also, with due respect, and Rajat, with due respect, you're a better advocate for 71, so I ask you. But my question, to come back to what you said, I'm not arguing against marriage. But what does marriage do that, for example, any other form of commitment, because is marriage more than a form of commitment? What does it do that just a committed partnership doesn't? Why is the symbolism of marriage still relevant or necessary?
Well, I would say that for me, it is something that is non-negotiable. It is what I believe in. I don't pass judgment on those who
No,
may...
I'm not
No, I'm
seeking-
talking about maintaining that relationship without that piece of paper. I want that piece of paper.
What
I
does it do for
definitely
you?
do. I'm old school. I'm, you know, from another era altogether. I'm sort of like a dinosaur in here. I'm sure I've taken the average age up by 50 years or something. So it's how you're raised. I was raised in an extremely conventional, middle-class, bureaucratic, very stable family. And we grew up believing that it's the right way to conduct oneself through life. And it has worked for me. So I really can't talk about how it may work for a lot of other people, and good luck to them. I can only say it works the way it works and has worked for me very well.
Fabulous. But if you were to, your children, if one of them said, no, I'd much rather be with somebody and not be married, would you try and talk them into marriage?
It would depend on who they want to be with.
Oh, good. So old school, both about marriage and parenting.
Completely. I mean, ridiculously so. I'm becoming not just my mother, I'm becoming my grandmother. And now that I have 6 grandchildren, to them I'll probably be like a great-grandmother, not even a grandmother. So yes, it is something that keeps going back. There is something intrinsically, I think it's part of, for all of us, we may love to diss it and say, oh, it doesn't matter. I mean, I may have been raised in a very conventional middle-class home, but I'm so different, I'm so rebellious, I'm so out there, I'm so fantastic and daring. But eventually, it all comes back to that, isn't it? Your childhood. Certainly in Rajat's book, everything keeps coming back to his father, his family when he was raised, how he was raised. throughout the book, that's like the narrative that most impressed me. So we are in a society like our Asian societies in India, where family plays an extremely vital role in defining who we are. We don't always see ourselves in a totally individualistic, totally isolated, I'm a bubble unto myself kind of a way. And I'm very happy for it. I think it provides a sense of continuity, and I cherish and value every single relationship of mine which I've invested in, which is really my very close, very, very few friends, and definitely all of it is about my family, my kids, their partners, the wives, the husbands, and now, of course, our grandchildren.
So you've said that you came from a very traditional background. And I think and I may have read it or I may have heard you say it, I think you almost draw a distinction between being liberal and progressive. So I'd say what is that distinction for you, and which side of liberal or progressive do you fall on?
Well, I can say it quite simply by making it into an anecdotal, for me, an interpretation of what it means. I think my parents were conservative. They were not liberal, but they were certainly extraordinarily progressive for their time. Because for me to be the youngest of 4 siblings at a time when they were born pre-independent India, and like Rajat and myself, we are children of the Republic, born in 1948. I had 3 older siblings, brother and also from IIT, but Kharagpur, and older sisters. But at no stage did my father, who was a government official, bureaucrat, did he make any distinction between how we were raised or the access we had to limited funds. After all, he was an honest government servant, so the resources were indeed limited. In terms of the opportunities to educate ourselves, to better our lives, there was no question that my brother would get something extra that the girls wouldn't get. Whether it was opportunities, education, food on the table, it's not that he was given an extra portion because he's a boy. So I just grew up taking all of this completely for granted. It was only much later in life that I realized that not every other person in my generation had been raised in that manner. That is called progressive, according to me.
You know, you've said, and I'll come back to that, but you say about your parents, and especially about your father, that he had a lot of vanities and that you were proud of those vanities. Yeah. And that your mother was a natural beauty, but that your father worked on who he was. Yes. And you, in the writing that I've seen, it's interesting that you hold far more admiration in your tone for the vanity. Now, we've been led to believe that vanity is a sin.
Never. Those people who pretend, oh, I don't really care how I look and it doesn't matter to me at all, particularly men who say it, they're liars. They spend much more time getting dressed in front of the mirror and on
and
vanity
those that
issues.
Don't should.
And well, whatever, however you want to look at it. But I found it extremely charming and very disarming that my father at 85, close to 90, when he'd had his cataracts, and he looked at himself in the mirror when the bandages came off, and he called me, he was agitated. He said, you know what, my dear, I've just noticed I have wrinkles. I found it adorable. And he said, what do I do about it? And the skin on my shins, I just noticed it, it's so dry. Can you get me a moisturizer? I thought that was extremely charming.
He preferred the cataracts, they didn't allow him to see those.
He preferred the cataracts also because he was a charmer. He was just naturally a very charming person. And he'd go for a walk every evening, and he had a harem of devoted young ladies, because they used to, of course, look at him as Mr. Rajadaksha, words of wisdom. At the end of a long walk, they'd ask him to sort out various problems, and he was a legal man, so they'd ask for free advice as well. And to each of them, he would lavish compliments. Oh, my dear, you're looking beautiful. Pink is your color. And oh, your hair has been done so well. You should wear flowers in your hair more often. once those cataracts were operated, he said, all those women I thought were so beautiful. Oh my God, I wish I'd never had my cataracts removed.
To return to the theme of age, you know, it's, when one is talking to Shobha, you only need to start a question by referencing something she said. So she said, I think somewhere, that after God and sex, age is the most powerful three-letter word. Now I have a three-pronged question to that. Number one, what is your relationship with God, sex, and age? What's the hierarchy between them? And on a more serious note, why do you say age is as powerful as it is?
No, what do you want me to answer first? Rank them?
Definitely rank them.
Sex, age, God.
Straw poll, how many agree with that? Okay. What is your relationship with all three?
Very healthy. I'd say I'm very proactive.
I'll come back to that in reference to God very quickly. But age. We are, of course, we are in every way. We are a classist society, we are a sexist society, but yes, in very, very significant ways, we are above all an ageist society. Is that unique to India? Is that one of the few problems that we can say is almost endemic globally? And I know that it seems, I think when, for example, the question I asked earlier, and you correctly asked me why I didn't ask Rajat that, but I think we tend also to go only by our experience of age. And so many of us, our experience of age has been that you're expected, or you expect yourself, to slow down. Is a large part of the problem of aging ourselves and not other people?
I wouldn't say that, because it's a globally ageist society and world. I would think in the Western world, they're much, much more judgmental, and women start feeling completely marginalized at the age of 35, 40, or certainly after they've hit menopause, it's the end of their life. It's finished. In India, I think women of a certain age are given respect of a different sort. You know the transition from being a Didi to Maji to Mataji and so on. But I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's not negative. Whereas I see a lot of young American girls, European girls across the continent are obsessed about hanging on to youth. And I think it's a kind of wasted energy, because you should make the best of each decade in a realistic way. And you don't want to be lamb passing off as, what's the term? Something dressed as lamb.
To the slaughter. But I will interrupt
Mutton
with
dressed as lamb. Or
what you have also said is desperation is the worst cosmetic.
Desperation is definitely the worst cosmetic. I mean, I see even today it's frightening, because this insecurity that is being imposed through Instagram posts and social media, and the pressure to look amazing, hot, fantastic, cool, hip, desirable, all of it, which is a kind of pressure that the young today in India are having to deal with, which certainly my generation didn't have to worry about. So, which may explain why a lot of very young people in show business are fixing themselves up, or what is euphemistically called getting work done at 16, 18, 20, 21. That's when a person, a young man or a young woman, you're peaking, you're glowing, you're at your prime. And why should you want to go under the knife, seeking some kind of perfection?
So because you alluded to young people, you've had a wonderful vantage position. You have 6 children. They, of course, now have their own children. But you have been a very close observer, not just of Indian society your age, but of the young. Yeah. What sets their insecurities apart from, do the young in contemporary India have the same insecurities that you did when you were younger, or has something changed very, very dramatically?
Very, very dramatically, I would say, because my generation, we were the product of a new India, a socialist India, where everything was about becoming somehow securing yourself, financially securing yourself, and getting a good education so that you'll have enough money and think in fairly, what would I say, but modest ambition. You would think like, oh, I should have a job by the time I'm 21. I should start saving the minute I get my first salary. By the time I'm 30, if I'm really lucky, I'll be able to own a Fiat. Or have, we thought in extremely, the scale was different. Today, by the time you're 21, and if you haven't hit that fantasy level and you don't have a Ferrari, whether it's borrowed or someone else's or your own or your father's or stolen, it's extremely, they're pegging their ambitions unrealistically high and paying a huge price for it, which is why we see such a big disconnect. They don't necessarily want to work for it. They want instant everything, instant recognition, instant fame, instant money, instant girlfriends, instant boyfriends. Everything has to be shrunk into a time frame because everybody is impatient and everybody is restless. But it's a global thing. And I like the energy of the young because I think that also, in a way, perhaps motivates them to go out and get what they want in a far more aggressive manner than my generation ever would have done.
So I think a strand that is both about the young, but also about, there's a word you are particularly allergic to, which is elite. But a lot of what you say seem to be the problems of the urban Indian elite. Or is it more endemic?
No, I'm not referring to Made in Heaven. And that's reflective of a very, very elite and very exclusive Delhi club. I'm talking about...
Well, that's a club we don't want to take elsewhere because, frankly, even Delhi should give that one up.
I travel a great deal across India and I talk to people across the board. In all my political commentary, it's really not about the elite anywhere. It's about listening to voices on the streets and voices on the ground and picking up cues about what India is all about. And there is no one India, as we all know. There are thousands and thousands of Indias. And even within Mumbai, you just have to step out of South Mumbai to go to any other area of Mumbai and you'll discover different Mumbais you didn't know yourself existed. Gully Boy is a superb example of that particular subculture because it had not been exploited earlier. So that definitely interests me a lot. And what I'm talking about, the restlessness, is not restricted to the elite at all. It's those who are outside that grid, who want to belong and are willing to pay a huge price to get there without actually knowing what getting there means in real terms. They just want to be able to walk into a fabulous hotel like this and to order, who's sponsoring us tonight? Glenlivet? Yeah, to get Glenlivet and not have to worry about where the money is going to come from. Also the credit card, which didn't exist in my time at all. Today you have kids who are given credit cards by their parents to use. It's a whole different ball game. And it is a part of New India, it is a part of impatient India, and we have to deal with it.
So talking of New India, what has Tinder done to New India?
What has Tinder done? Well, a lot of people have learned to swipe left, swipe right, and hope for the best at the end of it.
Okay, coming to your, when you set up or when you edited magazines like Stardust and, of course, Celebrity and Society, you pioneered, it was interesting you spoke of the fact that even your columns, they seek to represent voices from the ground. And that was also the quality you brought into celebrity journalism, which before your intervention was one giant act of fawning. Yeah. But you brought in what we would, and we were discussing, Rajat and I were discussing this earlier, and he said challenge into celebrity journalism. What made you believe that you could come in as an outsider and take on, so to speak, establishments Also, the part two of that question is, it's interesting because you seem to reveal a lot about the celebrity culture you observe, but one also gets the sense that you hold on to some, maybe because people need their illusions.
That's a lovely way to put it. Well, I think celebrity journalism, it's a very broad term. So it goes from the Kardashians, which is the ultimate vulgarity in celebrity journalism, but which sells and works and has made billionaires out of them.
Yeah.
And then there can be Michelle Obama, who is a celebrity worldwide, but look at the content of her book, look at her life, look at what she's saying, look at what she's talking about, and has inspired millions of not just women, but people across the world. She stands for something, but you can't say she's not a celebrity. Of course she is a celebrity. So it depends on how you use that term. I never did use it loosely just to describe people who are posh or good looking or have money or a certain lifestyle, though there is a place for that too. I'm not judging that. But when I was running Celebrity, it was wonderful because I used that term almost in a subversive way to actually be able to talk to people who interested me. And that included people like Morarji Desai, who of course refused to make eye contact with me because he didn't like making eye contact with a woman and didn't want to answer my questions. So I would ask him questions and he would turn to my colleague, a young lad who was an intern, and continue to respond exclusively to him without even turning to acknowledge my presence right next to him. So it's a big shift. I could interview him and people who I admired a huge amount of admiration for, whether it was Mrinalini Sarabhai or the person who started the whole Amol revolution, meeting them, George Fernandez, and people of my era who fascinated me. Haji Mastan, for example, gangsters, all sorts of people. It was important that their voices were also heard because it does not exclude. We are all part of a huge and very diverse society. And each one of us has some role that we are performing in it. So it does not mean that you automatically rule out those people who you do not approve of. It has nothing to do with your approval. They have a story to tell. It's as valid as any other story. And my job was to get those stories out and make sure that a lot more people could access their stories because it gave me immense satisfaction to do that.
So you've held a curious position as both participant but also almost a voyeur of popular culture and from the inside, because you have been part of that universe. In 5 decades of observing the people who we all observe on screens, but observing them up close, who have withstood your scrutiny and come out better than you expected, and who didn't fare so well, who disappointed you? Or let's just say, whom did you expect nothing of and then they gave you even less than nothing?
Oh, wow, that's a lovely question. I can tell you the person I had dismissed at first glance and first encounter because I just found him so excessively aggravating in his public conduct. That was Ranveer Singh. Before he became Ranveer Singh, and I foolishly wrote him off. I said, this guy is just such a show-off, and I don't know how much talent he has, but you cannot get by with this kind of conduct in public. Having gotten to know him and watched him on screen, much more important, from Band Baja to what he did in Gully Boy, I've told him this also in person, I'm going to eat my words and eat more than my words and say salam. Because what he has is his natural energy. He cannot help himself. He is a natural born performer. Give him an audience of 2 people and he'll perform with the same level of involvement and engagement. It's not just that he's playing to the galleries. This is who he is. And a lot of that translates onto the screen in ways that have surprised, delighted, and impressed me a lot.
And the tougher one, who disappointed you?
Oh, too long a list, really, but
Okay.
are you talking specifically about Bollywood?
Well, public life.
In
Bollywood,
public
sure, but
life?
yeah.
In public life, I would say Ramkrishna Hegde, because I, I, I expected a great deal from him. He was cerebral, he was well spoken, he was very urbane, extremely well read, very articulate, and he stood for something at that time. And it just vanished, all that one expected. Arvind Kejriwal, I have not met. I have been a supporter initially. Somewhere down the line, I felt disappointed. Maybe if I were to meet him again, I'd change my mind. I don't know. Anna Hazare, definitely. He could have been someone who I have met. And I thought India expected a great deal from him because he could have been a very powerful counter movement. And he could have been that one person who played a stellar role in steering India on a different course. He had moral leadership. He had the young people rooting for him. He had all of India looking up to him. At some stage, there was a misstep. I don't know how else to say it. And after that, he's never been able to recover lost ground. And well, there he is. Today, no one really is bothered about Anna Hazare anymore.
Okay, at this, since the bell has rung, one question, and on that note, we will ask Rajat to join us back up on stage, because when you have an interviewer as incisive as Shobha, you don't just interview her, you ask her to join you in asking questions. So tonight we'll have the fabulous pleasure of having Rajat join us. But before we do that, last week Algebra hosted a conversation with Dr. Raghuram Rajan in Bombay, and Shobha was a guest that evening. And when the conversations were over and everybody was asking questions, Shobha asked the most pertinent question of all. She asked Raghuram Rajan, "What do you think of Rajat Gupta?"
Are we going to reveal the answer?
Shobha, what did you make of his answer? And then I'll ask you, what do you think?
I don't think it's very fair to. It was a private comment that he made.
But actually, I thought, and then I will take the liberty of saying, he started out by saying he said I was starry-eyed about Rajat Gupta. And he did say, he set the stage for many of us to follow, where, to show us that it could be done. On that note, may I welcome back Rajat Gupta.
2 against 1, you're going to both ask me a question? All right.
I think I'm going to hog this one because I really loved your book. It's such a compelling read. I have written copious notes. Half my questions were asked by the gentleman before me. So I won't, because I'm not a financial whiz, nor am I a financial journalist, but I'm a woman with common sense. So I think I'm entitled to ask questions from that perspective and not overanalyze the book from the way he did, because he's qualified to do it and I'm not. But I have to ask you.
Before you ask a question, though, can I just say a word about Raghuram? Because you started that. First, he's IIT Delhi. That's 1 score on him. Second, I used to be a trustee of University of Chicago, and he was the youngest ever in the history of the university to be a tenured professor. An absolutely brilliant man. Third, when I set up ISB, I went to him and said, I really need your help. And he followed through, and he de facto became the chairman of our finance department and recruited all the faculty, finance faculty that is there. And he's just simply a world-class guy.
Okay, well, this same world-class guy said Rajat surrounded himself with criminals. So which criminals was he referring to, do you think?
I don't know. I assume he was referring to Rajratnam. Listen, I surrounded myself with lots of people. If anything I've done in my life is mentored a lot of people. And yes, one or two of them, I guess, are now criminals, including myself by legal definition.
So the question I wanted to ask you is, do you feel Indian or do you feel American?
I don't think there is necessarily an either or answer to it. This is the country of my birth. I am absolutely committed to it. And America is where I chose to make home. So I believe I'm a citizen of both the countries. I owe loyalty to both of them. And that's how I live my life.
The reason I'm asking is throughout your narrative, you play the Indian card.
Indian card.
The Indian card, I'll explain how. It's almost like I am this Indian guy who the entire American system was against. And as a matter of fact, there seems to be a point in that also, because how come no American banks got into any kind of a situation during this entire scandal? How come no WASPy colleagues of yours had to pay the price? How come two brown guys got the rap and were thrown into jail? So that there is a suggestion that it was a racist way of handling things, and that the firm, as it's called, McKinsey's, often sounds like another name for the mafia. Their operations, the way they were. And your wife warned you. She said, you're too trusting, and financial chaps are different from consultants. So I'd love for you to say how different is crooking, this way or that way? As financial chaps, as consultants, as Indian, as American, as WASPy, every which way.
I am not sure I fully grasp your question, but let me try to.
But try. I can repeat it if you wish.
And I can get a glass of wine and listen all evening.
No, I'm saying the victim card that you played through the book, through the narrative.
Firstly, I have, throughout the book, never claimed that it is because I was brown or Indian. I don't believe that, actually. I said that in the beginning. Can you not
Can
hear
we
me?
have the audio up, please?
Can you hear me? Yeah. So I've never actually said that. Second, I believe the American justice system needs a lot of reform. It is far from perfect. It has many problems. Saying that, I would rather work on the American justice system. I'm a great admirer of America. I am what I am because of America, certainly. I spent my formative years in this country, so I owe a great deal of debt to this country, and I believe in it. But that is not at the expense of, I think America is a great place. It attracts talent from all over the world. By and large, its institutions are terrific. That doesn't mean it can't be improved.
There is a very, very strong sense of family, of course, through the book. And your wife comes across as the biggest hero of the book. And you didn't go by her advice. Do you regret that? And you said you succumbed to fear. And that's one of the things you regret the most, that you didn't testify. How come you didn't listen to family? I mean, your daughters,
Let me be
smart
clear.
girls.
Let me be clear, my family was against my testifying. So I was consistently saying I should testify. My wife certainly was against it. My lawyers were dead against it. So the fear I was referring to at that point had to do with my not going by my first gut instinct, okay? I insisted till the last minute that I should testify to the lawyers till the last weekend, and somehow I can't explain it. At that weekend, we were told the judge that I was going to testify. And then my lawyers said, well, are you sure, over the weekend. So I think I, at that point in time, succumbed to fear, is my only analysis of it. Yes, my wife is a very wise person and I should listen to her more often. I generally do, sometimes I don't.
There are more than, in the book, you talk about more than 400 letters that were written, almost like character certificates during a very critical point in the trial process. They came from people like Bill Gates, Bill Clinton, Kofi Annan, barbers, friends, chauffeurs, colleagues, former IIT students or alumni. And all those 400 letters didn't make much of an impact, clearly, in the justice system. But out of those 400 people who vouched for you, how many of them are your friends today?
Virtually all of them. Firstly, I don't think you're correct in your statement saying it didn't make an impact. The letters come at a point when you've already been proven guilty by the jury. It is before the sentencing. And what the judge says in the US system is that you can get letters of support which the judge considers in your overall sentencing. So I would say the prosecutors were asking for 10 plus years, and the judge gave me 2 years. And I think that is the result of the letters that he received. He said in his, he said in his entire judicial career of 30 years, he had never received this kind of letters for anyone's support. And he was moved. He was very moved by that. And I mean, I should have got no sentence. I should have not been guilty. But system having delivered that judgment, he did the best he could in terms of the sentence he gave me.
And are they still in touch with you actively? Like Bill Clinton, who you played Scrabble with when you were in Gujarat with him, and lots of some of the most powerful people in the world who you were on speed dial kind of terms with. Do you feel also, second question, the Indian government didn't do enough to support you during that period? Or could they have done anything more than they perhaps did that we don't know about?
No, I didn't expect the Indian government to do anything. What has this got to do with the Indian government? In fact...
You talk about Preet Bharara, fellow Indian who let you down.
No. Listen, I don't think it's a Preet Bharara question. Preet Bharara was an Indian, fine. But basically, it's the fault of the system which has misaligned incentives. The prosecutors are judged. They're typically politically ambitious people. They're judged by their wins. They want to win at all costs by any means. That's the problem with the system, nothing to do with... There are many Preet Bhararas in the system, not just Preet Bharara. So, and I didn't expect the Indian government to do anything. I believed I was innocent. I believed that the process that one goes through would prove me innocent. It didn't. But I didn't want any influence. I never called President Clinton or the Prime Minister or saying, please lobby for me. Not at all. Even when I was put in solitary confinement, I didn't ask anybody. It was a grave injustice. I was in solitary confinement for 7 weeks. It's UN defines that as torture. And it was very hard. But I've never believed in using that. Let the system deliver whatever judgment it does.
You read the Bhagavad Gita, and he ends by saying, and I'll end my questions with that because I know she wants to ask a few, that the time, according to the Shastras, is the time is right for sannyas. Are you ready for sannyas?
Well, in the epilogue I write that I do believe in the 4 stages of life. I also believe that it's not quite defined by single points in time, but they overlap over time. So certainly chronologically I'm in Vanaprastha, which is a good description, where you spend most of your time in giving back to society in whatever way you want to give. I thought being in prison was a simulated sannyas because basically you didn't have many material possessions and you had time to reflect and think about yourself. And yes, I'm partly in that stage. I would look at time going forward as, I have personally believed in giving back to society as much as I can for a very long time. I want to renew my efforts and further my commitment to that. And I will also be much more on a reflective, contemplative, meditative mode as I go on in years. That's a natural evolution. As you talked a lot about aging, I think one should learn to age gracefully.
Absolutely. So we look forward to the second book, which will be about the contemplative, reflective phase in your life. Thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you.
Rajat, coming in to your time in prison, and you write of it, you said you entered it in a spirit of treating it almost monastically, right? How did you come to believe you can be, your life at that point was what television shows are made about, you know, the lives of the rich and famous. As Shobha said, your Rolodex alphabetically went through every world leader, policy maker, politician, cinema star. You had it all. And then overnight, you're in prison, including in solitary. How does monasticism suddenly come to you at that point? Did you already have it? If so, it didn't show. But how did it come to you? And sorry, part two of that, just to say, in solitary, what was the hardest thing you found?
Well, I think the first part of it is I probably experienced it in a voyeuristic way listening to my father. You know, when he was sick, I spent a lot of time with him. We'd go on walks, he would talk about his life, he would talk about life in prison, and so on. He was in prison for a noble cause, a freedom
The
fighter.
independence movement, yeah.
I was in prison for a petty crime, but nevertheless, it was a, you know, I could transfer some of that experience. He said one thing that has always stuck in my mind. He said, you can't always control what happens to you, but you can control how you react. And I believe that it is very important to react with grace, with forgiveness, with no anger, with humility, and try to make the best out of it. So my whole point was really, how do I take this time and improve myself in every dimension I could? And you asked a second question, now I've forgotten what
No,
the
so
second
in fact, it was about solitary, but it's interesting. Actually, what I did want to ask is, naturally, it goes without saying that prison life is something most of us, we can't imagine what it's like. But what was harder than one would imagine?
Well, you know, I think, I'll go back to your first question. It was extraordinary. One would think that in that prison, they had a special area for solitary confinement, which was a series of cells that you were put in. You would think that solitary confinement is a very quiet place because there's nobody to talk to. But it was the noisiest place in the prison. And the reason for that was people were there, they were going absolutely crazy. These were steel doors, steel bed, they were banging, they were shouting. And I saw in myself, people had marked days, you know, how many days they'd been there, because you lose sense of time and all that. And it just struck me that, you know, it's like people are going absolutely bananas. And that was the most surprising thing that I found. And
You
I
say in the
wondered,
book that it was noisier than Kolkata railway station.
yes. And I just wondered to myself that if I am here for 30, 40 days, whether I would start behaving like that. Luckily, I have to give credit to the Bhagavad Gita, because I read it cover to cover 3 or 4 times during that time period. And there are many parts of it which I'd never read before, were a little bit strange, caste system, and then all kinds of things are in there. But by and large, the message is quite extraordinary in terms of how you put your own life in perspective, how you put your surroundings, what is important, what is not. And it really helped me cope with that time. And I came out pretty sane. the guard who put me in there used to come, and I used to have a number of legal calls, so he had to come and get me and put me in the conference to have, my appeals were still going on. So after about a few weeks, he said, "This is very strange you are. You know, you're the only person who never asks, when am I getting out? Because all these other people are banging the doors and asking, when am I getting out?" So I said, "Why should I? Solitary confinement is like jail with room service." So,
Did you, you know, again, you say at some point in the book when they moved you to solitary that you felt you could cope, but you didn't know if you could convince your family that you could cope.
Yeah.
How did your family deal with all of it? That they have been supportive is evident, but what was the toll it took on them? And I think somewhere your wife says that she couldn't allow her grief or rage or unhappiness to show because she needed, so it's almost a quid pro quo. You're showing her that you can cope, and she's showing you that she can cope.
We had this interesting game going on between both my wife and my daughters. And I would keep telling them, "I'll be fine if you'll be fine." And they'll say, "We are fine, you please be fine." Okay, so we kept on saying this to each other, trying to convince each other that it'll be all fine. I know when I was in solitary confinement, I couldn't have any contact with them other than writing mail, some snail mail, so to say. So I know that they were very concerned at that time whether I would be able to cope.
But you said also that your wife's way of showing you that when she is tense, she overcompensates by feeding you. And she would come to meet you with snacks galore, which she would get from, and you would know that that's a sign that she's under a great deal of stress, because that was her way of coping with stress.
I am not, yes, there were very unhealthy snacks also, generally available there, but she would do that, but she generally does that anyways. I mean, I have the privilege of having Ujla and Prakash here, and we were very good friends in Scandinavia, and we would often get together at home, and she loves feeding people. So that was generally the idea. She feeds everybody all the time. More is better. So that was generally the truth.
It was also said that I think you're the prison supervisor, or whatever the term is. You had the longest visitors list of anybody, over 100 people. And you've interestingly said that there was a power dynamic in play. Clearly, power dynamics exist as strongly inside prisons as outside it. Basically, they wanted to strip your dignity, and if you did not allow yourself to appear undignified, they would keep at it. Would you give us an example of an incident like that?
It's all about power dynamics, you know. As they say, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. They have absolute power when you're in there, and they want you to not only go by the rules, which by and large I did, but they want you to feel subservient. And I personally felt like a political prisoner. I was a prisoner of the times. I strongly believed I didn't do anything wrong, and why should I cower to them? I obeyed the rules. I was fine, but they were not satisfied with that.
There's a wonderful point where you said that during that roll call, you bent down for a few microseconds to tie your shoelaces, and that was seen as an act of defiance, and after that is when you were thrown into solitary.
For the first time.
For the first time. Because you were not standing straight at attention during roll call, and you bent down to tie your shoelaces. That seems extremely extreme, to say the least. Sounds worse than Indian prisons. And the fact that they didn't let you, later in the book you talk about, everything depended on their marzi to give you a change of underwear and fresh clothes, and you might have to go without it. If you missed that turn,
in solitary,
you've had it because you missed it. So you
Yeah.
didn't know when the guy would come around again with fresh clothes. So
all of the, I mean, solitary confinement is a absolutely horrible experience. I mean, there is, I cannot describe how inhumanly they treat it, and how the surroundings are, and how the food is served, and everything. I mean, to make you an extreme thing, you know, they give you one set of clothes. When they come to give you another set of clothes, you are supposed to strip in front of them, return the dirty clothes, and then you'll get the new clothes. Unnecessary procedure, it doesn't make any sense. They do strip searches all the time, randomly. I mean, you know, whenever they want. I can go on and on. It's a pretty horrible experience. But what doesn't kill you will make you stronger.
You also, in Solitary, read the 1,000-page biography of Winston Churchill. What did you get out of that? Did you get anything out of that that helped you during that time?
It is interesting. You know, I write in this book also, I wondered how history is written. In that book, Winston Churchill was portrayed as a great hero. And if you look at some of what he did, and some of the stories that actually my father told me, which had to do with the Bengal famine and what he did and his role in creating the Bengal famine, which killed 40 million people or some number like that. In the whole book, it was not even mentioned. A 1,000-page book, you know, it was never mentioned. His way, how he managed India, his own role in that, and in a number of other sort of massacres that were done. And he's remembered as a great statesman of the century.
I can see hands moving towards the bell. I have a question that's actually for the both of you. Shobha pointed out earlier, as I did, that you're both born in the same year, both are children of independence, of a new republic. It was very unusual in 1948 to imagine for yourself the place in the world that you went on to imagine and that Shobha went on to imagine. She, by every account, went where few women went at that time, and even today, few hesitate to be as outspoken in their beliefs and the way they live as she does. And you showed Indians, a whole generation and generations of Indians, that there was a place for them in the world, not just in their country, that the new imagined India was an India where anything was possible. What gave you, both of you, what gave you that conviction in yourself, that conviction in the world out there? Did it have anything to do with where you came from, or did it just originate within you?
I would say really I have to give complete and total credit to my parents, to my family. And the self-belief is what drives most human beings, if you have it. But to get to that stage, you have to know who you are. You have to know your limitations, you have to know your potential, and you have to know how to realize that and to deal with your shortcomings in a way that is manageable, not just to yourself, but to those you share your life with. For me, belief in the future, I'm an optimist and will die an optimist, that regardless of how terrible circumstances can be. And my husband often says that, and it's a line that I use frequently when I'm feeling low. And as you know, I've been through, for my political writings, I have been at the receiving end of some rather rough treatment, nothing like Solitary yet, but not very pleasant either. So he says that after every low tide, there's always a high tide. That's how it works. So during those periods, I've always used to remind myself that there will be a high tide, and I think that's what's kept me on course and kept me going.
So I would start by saying that there is an enormous role of being at the right place at the right time. I can't say that I followed a very deterministic path to design where I was. I mostly went with the tide, was at the right place at the right time. That's how I went to business school. I just decided to apply to Harvard. I got turned down by every other place. I got accepted at Harvard. It's not...
You were also the first person to reject ITC's job offer.
That's true, but at times it's like you're at the right place at the right time. I was happened to be in Scandinavia when the head of Scandinavian office got sick. And at age 33, I was appointed the head of Scandinavia. You know, and I made a success of it. That was great. I thought hard about what I always wanted to give back to my country here, born country of my birth. And I thought about what am I good at? What can I give back? And the idea struck me that, McKinsey is the largest employer of in leading business schools in the world. So I said, and I used to sit on a number of boards. I was chairman of the Harvard Business School board and a number of other business. I said, I know something about business education. Why don't I try to start a world-class business school in this country? And so it was a little bit of thinking about, okay, let me do the right things as I think about it, and not follow a very deterministic path, but what I thought was the right thing to do. And sometimes it worked out. Most of the times it worked out to great effect, and I was very happy with that. And I think that's, in my own way, that's like trying to follow the philosophy of Karma Yoga. Just do the right thing. Forget about what happens.
On that note,
I want to ask one final question.
On
One
that
final
note-
question. I'm just greedy. It's old training. That if Narendra Modi were to hire you as a consultant, what would your advice be to him? How is he going to win this election? You advised other governments, you advised various people. Hypothetically, if he were to say, come on board as a consultant, tell me, how does my team win the next election?
Well, if there is one thing I have zero expertise in is politics, so I would be the wrong person to ask about that question. But, I would say that in the end, no, I shouldn't say, because I don't really know much about how political
Just say it,
campaigns-
it's all right.
No,
You don't have to be an expert.
No, my feeling is that, his record obviously speaks for itself, and keep doing the right things, both when you're fighting the election, etc., and kind of live with whatever the results are. Don't worry about it too much.
I have to say,
Topping
Shobha, now I have a follow-up question, because really asking Narendra Modi how he'll win may not be that difficult. How would you suggest Rahul Gandhi win the election?
No, if you ask me what they should do, then I have some points of view.
Then
How they
please
win
give
the
us-
elections, I don't know.
Okay, that's
But-
a place to start for the final question. What should they do?
Well, not about winning the election. What should they do in the country? I mean, fundamentally, there are two, apart from we are already a democracy, which is great. Beyond that, it's all about education and health. Those are the two things that are great equalizers, that give people the opportunity and even playing field. So, unfortunately, we're making progress in education, but the quality and where it's going is not very good. The state of the health of the country is poor and not getting as rapidly improving as it should be. I just now came from Ahmedabad, and for the last year I've been working on a health initiative there. It will be the largest longitudinal study we'll be doing, 300,000 people. We're looking at the maternal and child health in that population. I'm just sad to report that it's not improved as much as it should. And I would just ask whoever gets elected Prime Minister to concentrate on those two things. And if you do, those are the basics. And then, of course, all the things that we all know about in terms of economic growth and job creation and all of that. But the fundamentals are those two.
On that note, thank you, Rajat. Thank you, Shobha.